Well, you've seen the title of the video, so no point in denying it. We are going to talk about Vikings today.
The word Viking evokes images of fierce warriors pillaging across Europe, pillaging in ships that look like this. Yeah, we're all familiar with this iconic image. However, these iconic ships are pretty far from being the first vessels used by the Vikings. This is one of the earliest ships in Viking history. It's called the Njardar Saga ship. It dates back to around 820 AD and was discovered in Norway in 1960. And as you can see, it looks nothing like those iconic longships that came later. This is just a simple trading boat.
The Njardar Saga is named after a legendary Viking chieftain who traveled to the Byzantine Empire and traded for books.
He's considered to be one of the first Christian Vikings. But why are we talking about this tiny little boat? Well, the truth is, Vikings didn't start out as ferocious pillagers. They were actually merchants first and foremost. Let's go back a bit. Vikings lived during what we call the Viking Age, which lasted from around 800 AD to around 1100 AD. It wasn't a single empire or kingdom, but rather a collection of Scandinavian peoples who shared similar cultural traits. These people came from modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Now, Scandinavia back then looked a little different than it does now. Most of Denmark and Norway were still ruled by a bunch of petty kings, while Sweden was kind of in a civil war between a guy named Ivar the Boneless and his half-brother, Halfdan. Halfdan would end up conquering most of Sweden and uniting it under his rule, making him the first king of Sweden since the collapse of the Viking Age. Okay, big side note here.
Some scholars debate whether or not Vikings could technically be called a civilization.
The main argument against it is that they never really formed a central government. There was never a big empire that ruled over all the Vikings. Instead, the various Viking groups were semi-independent and only cooperated when it came to raiding or trading. But if you ask me, they totally were a civilization. For starters, they had cities.
Yeah, Vikings had some pretty nice cities like this one, called Hijinks.
It was located in what is now Denmark and served as a major trading hub for the Vikings. But Vikings also built some pretty impressive structures like burial mounds. These mounds often contained treasure and served as a symbol of wealth and power. Plus, they had culture, art, and literature. The Vikings had their own myths, legends, and folklore. They created amazing pieces of art, and they even had a writing system.
So, yeah, Vikings absolutely were a civilization in my book.
Okay, getting back to
the topic at hand.
The Viking Age began with the start of the 8th century, a time when Europe was feeling pretty vulnerable. The Carolingian Empire had taken a big hit because of a massive drought. Food production went down, which led to famine and unrest. This instability allowed the Vikings to start their pillaging across Europe. They raided monasteries first because they usually had lots of valuables and weren't defended very well. But as the Viking Age went on, they started targeting more important places like towns and villages. To defend themselves, many European rulers turned to mercenaries to protect their lands from these pesky invaders. One of the first famous Viking raids happened in 793 when a group of Vikings attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne in England. They stole a bunch of stuff and left the place in ruins. From there, Viking raids became more and more common across Europe. The reason why Vikings did this is pretty obvious. They wanted stuff and they weren't afraid to take it. But keep in mind, these guys didn't have guns or any advanced weaponry. They didn't even have horses. Their weapons were basically just swords, spears, axes, and bows and arrows. Also, don't think they were always the attackers. Sometimes they would get hired to do the attacking for other people. In fact, during the 860s, a Viking warlord named Ragnar Lothbrok terrorized England. He led a band of warriors on a series of devastating raids, pillaging and plundering as he went.
But Ragnar wasn't just a mindless berserker.
He was a shrewd tactician and a cunning leader. After one of his raids, he negotiated a deal with King Ella of Northumbria.
But Ella broke the deal and threw Ragnar into a pit of snakes.
So Ragnar escaped and returned with a massive army to sack Northumbria. After his victory, Ragnar traveled to France, where he fought against the Franks. As the Viking Age went on, these guys just kept expanding their reach. They didn't just attack places in Europe. They went all the way to the Byzantine Empire and even attacked Constantinople. They also sailed west and discovered the island of Iceland and set up settlements there. Eventually, the Vikings even made it to North America, establishing a settlement in Newfoundland, Canada, around 500 years before Christopher Columbus arrived. Vikings also weren't just bloodthirsty killers. They were explorers, traders, and settlers. Much of their seafaring was done for trade, and they established trading posts all over Europe, the Middle East, and even North Africa. Some Vikings even converted to Christianity and became missionaries. And Vikings weren't even limited to just men. Women played an important role in Viking society. They participated in trade, managed households, and even fought in battle alongside their male counterparts. In fact, this one famous Viking warrior queen named Lagertha, who cut off her own balls because she didn't like having them. The Viking Age lasted for almost 300 years, but eventually it came to an end. Around the year 1100, Viking raids and pillaging across Europe became less frequent. There are a few reasons for this. For one, as Europe became more settled and organized, it was harder for Vikings to find undefended targets. Plus, many European rulers started hiring mercenaries to protect their lands. Not to mention the Vikings themselves started to assimilate into European culture. As time went on, they abandoned their old ways and became farmers, traders, and even kings. But let's not forget that despite their assimilation into European culture, the Vikings maintained much of their distinct identity throughout the Viking Age. They continued to speak their own languages, practice their own religions, and follow their own customs. And their unique blend of Scandinavian culture would have a lasting impact on Europe. Viking art, architecture, and even literature influenced the development of European culture for centuries to come. All right, so the Vikings had a huge impact on European history.
They pillaged and plundered their way across the continent, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake.
But they also explored and traded and even converted to Christianity. They were fierce warriors, but also skilled sailors and navigators. They were raiders, but also merchants and missionaries. They were a complex and fascinating people whose influence on European history is immeasurable. Now for the big question. What should we talk about next? Ancient Rome, ancient Greece, maybe the Egyptian Empire? You decide. Just comment your ideas below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. If you want to help us grow, leave a like and a share. Thanks for watching. See